right. Hey, guys. For those that are just tuning in, I'm Chris Arredondo, co-founder and VP of Customer Success here at Cargo Chief. Steering a little bit away from, probably call it that traditional demo, I want to talk a little bit about how our procurement platform, C4, can help you do more with what you've got. And whether that means everything coming straight to your TMS, like those partners that we've got on today, or giving you workflows to optimize every single part of that load lifecycle, starting with acquiring new business. Over the last few months, and sort of related to the Game Changers event, I've talked to a handful of partners and brokerages. It really comes down to two things: winning new business and improving throughput. And a lot of companies are focusing on those strategies to amplify the things that they did in the past that really help them build that foundation in their business in the beginning. That doesn't just mean doing more with your team, but also with the freight that you've already got on the board. Carrier relationships don't have to start only when freight is on the board. It can actually start at the beginning of that load life cycle when you're trying to acquire that new business. So how we look at doing this is through more of like a pipeline, if you think of it like on the sales side, in a progression of freight. So before I get into that part, I want to talk a little bit about how we build our capacity and where that data comes from to help you build a more reliable carrier network. So here on my screen, I've got sort of our interface. And again, a lot of our TMS partners, this data will come right to you. Depending on the TMS, that will be an all-in-one solution with capacity, rating, digital freight matching, and all that whole kit and caboodle. Some of them may just have the webhook that allows us to create an entirely different experience rather than just like a shell or a skeleton of an application. So here at this part, what I'm going to talk about first is the capacity list. A lot of people traditionally, what they'll have is either in their head, in a spreadsheet, their carrier book of business, or a shared Teams drive that somebody's looking at to add different procurement life cycles, or maybe they're writing that stuff down on a sticky note. The problem is that information doesn't interact with your loads or your data in real time. When we think about carriers or your freight mix, a lot of times we hear people posting anywhere between 60 to 70% of their freight, leaving the other 30% left to their traditional methods. When we think of like the capacity here, I'll take this carrier A&M group for an example. Let's say that today you probably have them in a spreadsheet, and maybe it's Houston to Atlanta, and that's the lane that they run for you on that other 30% of your dedicated freight. Now in C4 across the entire network, when these carriers book LA to Seattle, Chicago to Columbus, or in this case, Winchester to Uxbridge, those lanes start to aggregate and populate onto that carrier profile. So what that allows you to do is really leverage a much broader carrier footprint with the same carriers that you got. So sort of going back to like doing more with what you have without going beyond what you've got and shouldering all that risk that can come through another marketplace. So here on the other side, the transaction or the ratings side works similar as the carrier database. What happens is as soon as that load gets booked across the network, that transaction is processed immediately. And that helps us tell you guys sort of where the rate's going and where it's been when it relates to the market. The other side is the Greenscreens integration. A lot of people will have this more robust data mix and freight mix to kind of tell you where you buy, to give you a better prediction of what that rate is actually going to be. So with the Greenscreens integration, you can actually sort of look at market versus your buying power to help you make that better decision. It's a little bit about where our data comes from. To start on the pipeline progression of freight, we've got sort of your traditional digital freight matching. You can call that like your spot freight. What we like to do is start a little before that with opportunities. What we usually do is use our feature called projects, and that's really where you can come in, acquire that new business, sort of commoditize capacity, and go serve that up with a tangible rate and capacity to your shippers to go actually win that new business. In C4, there's a couple ways that you can build a project, but generally what you can do is run a search, click this new project button. Different types of projects with the procurement side will populate your origin, destination, trailer type. You can come in and add your different customer name that will be fed right from your TMS. The volume, if it's like twice a week or 5 times a month or whatever it is, then you can actually use some rating calculations using both C4 or Greenscreens rate. You can figure out where your max buy should actually be when you are trying to procure carriers and find that next relationship to go actually win that freight. Skipping across this, you can do a couple things like add some notes, even assign this project to somebody if you're on the customer rep side, you can assign this to somebody on the ops team. When you actually have a project, working through it is pretty simple. A few ways you can drag and drop some carriers over to those projects, or you can actually click into the project and move your pipeline of carriers across to either recommended, engaged, or procured tab. That really helps you stay organized and in a way that's interacting with your data rather than you just having spreadsheets, sharing information in some decentralized location that isn't actually updating in real time. So different ways to build out projects. The next way that we look at a project is really that second step, your digital freight matching, your spot freight, all that 60-70% of loads that go to load boards, those can actually start to be pushed out to your network that match our database. Once we identify through scorecards which lanes that are, maybe need some improvement, that where we can work on your load to carrier ratios, we'll actually start to make recommendations to the second, or rather the third group of freight called project waterfalls. And what that helps us do is say we've already got, this lane Davenport to Ohio, roughly a 1-to-1 carrier ratio, where we can say, all right, we've got our set carriers, that's 40 carriers that we want to start to target a lot more strategically rather than just blasting this out to everybody. So what we'll do is actually build out a project and call it waterfall tendering. To skip sort of what that would look like, coming over to one that's already sort of been created, you can group your carriers in priority, where once your load becomes available, it'll check against your projects. In that first group, if you want to identify those top 3, that load will go out to those carriers. 10 minutes later, go out to the second group, and so on and so forth. The last part of that progression is your dedicated projects, where once you have that handshake contract carrier, that's where we sort of position book now for those carriers. So that way you can start to give that carrier that first right of refusal to start booking loads a lot more efficiently. And the theme of a lot of the conversations today is that task overload. So we can sort of automate a lot of that stuff for you and drive efficiency. So in a nutshell, that's C4. If anyone wants to hear more about it, stick around and we'll be around and reach out to us.